You're about to watch a recorded session from the Brand Podcast Summit. For more recordings or information on the podcasting events we have coming up very soon, go to brandpodcastsummit.com.
The Brand Podcast Summit.
So I want to introduce our next panel discussion, which is titled How to Grow Your Podcast. That's not true. That's absolutely not what this session is about. I read the wrong section. It is, of course, the art of the interview. That's what you're here for. The art of the interview. NPR and BBC share their secrets. So I want to welcome our guest speakers, Sonari Glinton and Ena Miller, Sam Datta-Paulin and Erin MacIndoe Sproule, who are both, Sam and Erin are from Lower Street. They're our executive producing team here. So to introduce everybody individually, Sonari Rhodes Glinton is an award-winning journalist you may know as the host of Shattering the System, as well as his work on with NPR on This American Life and Planet Money. I think we're all big fans of those shows. Throughout his career, Glinton has covered a wide range of topics from politics and the economy to culture and entertainment. So a ton of really interesting experience that I think we can all apply to our shows as brands. Ena is a journalist predominantly or prominently featured across BBC. Her work focuses on women, underrepresented communities, and people living on the margins. Done some really amazing work, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say. Sam, our very own Sam, well, he's his own Sam. Sam, you are your own person, but you're also a part of Lower Street, and we're very glad for that. And Sam is an award-winning Lower Street exec producer, journalist and presenter with over 15 years in the industry. He's a former newsreader, YouTuber, TV and BBC commissioner and radio station head. He's got a wealth of experience across broadcast and streaming industries. Erin MacIndoe Sproule started her career at the CBC. And actually, I didn't mention CBC in the title of this talk. It is actually supposed to be NPR, BBC, and CBC share their secrets. She's an award-winning executive producer with us at Lower Street, and she is recognized for her outstanding contributions to Boston Consulting Group's flagship climate and sustainability podcast, which one of our panelists, Nick, mentioned actually, which is called Climate Vision 2050, which also won a W3 Gold for Best Branded Podcast. So we're very proud of that, and Erin's amazing work there. So a very capable set of people to talk us all through the art of the interview, and I think this is something that all podcasters can be working on, no matter how experienced we are. And I think as brands, quite often we get caught up with we're so focused on the takeaways that we want to get across to our customers to represent our brand in the right way that sometimes we can forget about making really compelling stuff. And so these fine folks are going to talk us through all of that stuff. So I'm going to hand over the reins to Sam and Erin. Thank you all so much. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Harry, for the wonderful introduction that we all wrote ourselves. Thank you for reading it wonderfully. So we thought we'd start off just by way of icebreaker, talking about some of our best and worst interview experiences. And I will be the first to put myself under the spotlight just to get us rolling. And my worst interview experience, let's get it out of the way early, because it's an essential lesson for all podcasters, is an interview I did with astronaut Chris Hadfield about 10 years ago. It was in the Science Museum in London. They closed down the Science Museum for us. We had the whole place to ourselves at night. It was me, Chris Hadfield, and a camera operator, and we had an hour with him to explore the wonders of space. We would have had if, when we got back to the studio, the microphones had been plugged in. Lesson number one, always check your audio. And that was on me. We did have a camera operator, but it was my job to check that they were recording, and I didn't. And that was probably one of the worst professional moments of my career. I think I was absolutely beside myself, partly because he was an absolute hero, and partly because there was a lot of people's time and effort, including Chris's, wasted. And I've got a bit of audio to play for one of my best interviews. And it's not necessarily the best interview I've ever done, but this is one that I really appreciated because the whole podcast just turned out fantastically well. So Thank you, Marina. That is an appropriate emoji. So I think Erin's going to play that quickly now. If it works, if not, I can describe it for you.
It has this like really uncanny way of asking very simple questions in a very kind way that makes you come to a conclusion. And so he walked me kind of through the problem, and then at no point did Matt ever really say, you have to fire all these people, because he would that's not his kind of like coaching style, but he kind of just like, I guess like made me see the reality of what was happening and how fucked up it was. And so I came to this conclusion after kind of like working it through with him and Ben, and it was just clear that our whole dev team was fucked and the whole team had to go. And that is something that like causes me like really deep anxiety. Like, we have all these people that you invest so much time and energy into, but then like having to let them go is like, it's like this crushing thing. Like, even when you are pissed off at someone, like I hate the idea of like letting someone go. It's like understanding we're going to have to like let go of an entire team felt like this impossible task, but at the same time, it immediately felt like this is extremely right, and I've known this for the past 6 months. I just couldn't see it through the weeds I was in. But yeah, it came as both a relief, but also deep fear.
And that was a CEO of a tech company talking about how he had to let go his entire development team and basically start from scratch. And Joel, if you're listening, hello and thank you for our many interviews, which basically turned into therapy sessions where I cut myself out of all of them. But that was just such a wonderful podcast series to get such honesty out of someone who was better or worse marketing their company. Right, I will pass over to Erin. Hello, Erin. Tell us about your best and worst interviews.
Hello. So I'll start off with one of my worst interview stories, which for some reason when I was preparing for this panel, I was really going back to my early career a lot for some reason, both with my successes and failures. And one of my failures that I deeply remember was one of my first jobs was working for a TV production company. And I was working on a show that was about the salacious lives of history's royals, and kind of looking at those kinds of stories. And I had a pre-interview with an expert on Marie Antoinette, and I did no research before this call. Like, didn't even read the Wikipedia page like Cole's notes on Marie Antoinette, and I knew nothing. Nothing. And I got on this pre-interview, and this expert was extremely insulted by my lack of knowledge on the subject and was basically berating me on the whole call. And I was maybe like 3 weeks into this job. It was one of my first jobs. And my boss just happened to, this was when we all used to work in offices always. And my boss was standing right next to me the whole time. So I had to do this like double speak where this person is berating me, but I don't want my boss to know. So I'm kind of like, wow, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, great, cool. Moving on to the next question. So trying not to let her know, but also dying inside because this person is just like, how do you not know anything about Marie Antoinette? So yeah, I learned an important lesson, which I can talk about more as part of this panel, but just about not doing a little bit of research. Like, just know enough that you can have a somewhat intelligent conversation with the person who you're on the phone with. And maybe I'll save my success story until after we hear from Ena and Sonari. But yeah, that is my introduction through failure.
Thank you, Erin. Sonari, I'd love to hear more about your successes and if you're willing to share them. A failure with a lesson learned.
Well, I think I'm a little different because when I think of failed interviews, it's the ones where I didn't have batteries in my machine, right? So that's the literally because I don't believe in like that's an important point, which is that I had a realization early on in my career that I can't be embarrassed. I mean, I can be, but that's for the show or for the thing. That really I'm there to sort of reflect off of a person. But the worst example I will give you is at the very beginning of my career, I had a new machine. It was a digital audio tape. This was back in the days when you had to, what we called the tape sync. For those on this panel who are very young, we just have to go out and record a person and then put the tape into a FedEx and FedEx it to the person the next day, and then they would edit it, right? And the worst thing that you could do with a tape sync is hit the stop button, right? Is like you don't stop the machine. But I wasn't fully aware of what I was working with, which is what I think the failure is, and the lesson from that is like, if I have a machine, if I have a microphone, a Zoom or whatever, it's the 5 minutes beforehand or 10 minutes beforehand. So you are not nervous and bringing that nervousness in. But I was interviewing the great Jerry the Iceman Butler. And I had a new machine that took 4 batteries, but I only saw 2. And so halfway through the interview, the machine stopped. And it was for a show called American Roots with Nick Spitzer, which I always have to say, which I always have to say is,
I'm sorry, I need to switch my microphone. I hope you can now hear me at quality. Again, so I didn't do that, right? Which is the example of double checking. I just assumed that it was set because I did it before.
Sorry, so you did it on purpose, obviously.
Yeah. But there's never, but that's the sort of thing is that no one is often the person you're interviewing you're interviewing them about their expertise, the thing that they have dreamt of their entire life. They're ready. So you being ready and not injecting your nervousness. Also, though, I should say that is also a trick in interviewing. Studs Terkel who's the great writer, used to flub with his machine as if he didn't understand it, right? Before he did an interview. He'd be like, ra-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. I can't know. They gave me this machine. I don't understand it. Blah, 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 blah. And one of the things that does is that disarms people. It opens them up. You realize that they realize that you're human. And, the thing that I always say is you can't really make a mistake. Now I say this about journalists and stuff like that, is they assume you're smart because you work for NPR or the BBC or whatever. No one's they assume that you know what you're talking about. So what you have to show up with is your curiosity and being sort of transparent, because that allows. So yeah, I have so many failures, so many times where the end of that story is I didn't record the interview. I missed it and it was halfway through. The host of the show, Nick Spitzer, sent me back to record it again, which is thank you for the career, Nick Spitzer, wherever you are. And but what was funny is that the disarming part is the people in the office thought I was an idiot. And when I came back to start covering the politics of, they always gave me a little bit of a pass. So it's really, how can you turn the bad situations into good? There's no such thing as a bad interview or a bad question. It is usually about how you interpret it or how you show up for it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sonari. And Ena, if there's one thing you've learned over your career from interviews, good and bad.
When I think of the worst one, I actually still think about it once in a little while, because I keep thinking, how could I have done things differently? And the one thing I notice about being a journalist on one side is that people don't always have to like you, especially if you're interviewing politicians, you're wanting to challenge them. Actually, I don't want you to like me because we're not going to be friends today because I've got the story to tell. But on the flip side, when I'm doing stories on people that are vulnerable, that want to tell their story, that are really passionate about, what their cause is, and they don't get the opportunity to tell their story, you want them to like you, because if they like you, then they will open up to you. And and they will tell you things that will maybe create the headline, or, you know, that will make their story more interesting, or the people listening will actually get hooked in. And this interview, I'm not going to go into the details of who it was, where I was, etc., but it wasn't actually that long ago. And I was interviewing a woman who told me that she'd done this quite a lot, these interviews, Zoom interviews. So she was very good at it. So I was like, okay, this is going to be great. She then proceeded in the interview to start asking to stop the interview, and then if she could start again, because she wanted her sentence to be perfect. And after about 6 or 7 takes, I was like, we can't keep doing this in the nicest possible way. And I guess with this interviewee, she didn't like me. And I just found that really fascinating, because she stopped the interview to tell me she didn't like me. She told me she didn't like my voice. She told me I was talking too fast. And I was like, I think it's my Scottish accent. This is just how I speak. I was also under time pressure. I had quite a lot to do. And so maybe I was speaking really fast. And I think as well that the expectations, she'd seen other people that day doing the same story that she was talking about, but they were getting like a whole package around them. And my bosses just wanted a 20-second clip. And I sort of told her what those expectations were, and she didn't like that either. She expected to have a bigger part to play. And finally, as well, I think with her, what I learned as well was that she became bigger than the actual story. And although that the questions I was asking was to make her look good, because that's all I ever want in these things, I wanted her to look good, I wanted her to sound good. I wanted to actually give her more than 20 seconds if we could possibly do it. And the questions I asked, she didn't like them because she felt I was she called it grief porn. And so it just all fell by the wayside. It just wasn't a good connection. How would I change the circumstances? And it's really bad to say that I would probably not just interview her again. Yeah. If I saw her coming, I'd be like, nah, somebody else, because it just didn't work. It just didn't work. I still got what I wanted, but yeah, it was very difficult.
That is very honest.
She didn't like me.
Oh, we all like you, Ena. And
Thank you.
your Scottish accent, I had to say in the comments, is getting a lot of love, as it
Oh,
should.
thank you, everyone.
But I've often found, and kind of moving into the tips and tricks, and we'll make it more of a free-form conversation now, so feel free to butt in and tell me to shut up, anyone. I've often found actually that when I've had someone who has not responded well to a question, or the whole interview is going badly, one question that seems to work really well sometimes is just to stop it and just say, okay, look, what question would you like me to ask you? In an ideal world, or what do people not ask you that you wish they would? And sometimes that just hits that reset. It puts them back in control. They get the narrative. If it's, you can always edit it out. This is my top tip. Don't panic because you can edit. But I often find that actually putting them back in control sometimes redresses that balance. I don't know what the rest of you think about that, whether that passes with you.
I mean, sorry, someone speak. I was going to say, I'm in control of the interview, right? It's like, that is a really important thing, because I have never been more afraid of the interview subject than I was of, my first editor, right? So I am and really the nerdy public radio person in me literally thinks of a woman named Mary who lives in Texas. And literally, like, I have and I'm out there working for Mary, right? Mary doesn't understand this. Mary is 48 years old. She's a school teacher. And so that you show up really, that's also a part of who I am as a reporter. I'm a political reporter. So, I can't, it's not all, that's my problem actually, is that I sometimes show up loaded for bear when I'm talking to a civilian. And I think that that's really important, is like understanding what the interview is and who you're talking to. I never want, though, to let you think, like, I never let you hold the microphone, all those things. Like, you need to know that you're talking into a microphone and it's going to be recorded, and I am sort of in control. I think, Sam, some of the questions that you can ask is like, the real tricks to me are the questions. And me and a friend were just saying, and they're all quick. Why is that? How did that make you feel? What happened next? You could do an infinity interview just on that. And what question I should be asking, what question should I be asking you? I ask that question almost if I don't ask it every time, then I'm always, what is the question? And then there's a bunch of them that you can do, like, what do people like me get wrong? How do people misinterpret you? Like those things, so that you have, usually that is the most important soundbite that you're going to use. But those questions are really helpful.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I really want to let you know that if you're enjoying this content, you're going to love what we have coming up very soon. Another brand podcasting event that goes even deeper into what we're discussing in this session. So for more information on that, please go to brandpodcastsummit.com. And if you're watching this session and you're finding yourself thinking, this is all great, but like, how am I going to get this started this week? You know, I need some help with my brand's podcast. We'd love to have a chat about what you're working on. You can find all the information on how to contact us at lowerstreet.co. We also have a bunch of case studies and some examples of the things that we've been working on to give you a sense of what that looks like. So yeah, if you want help with your brand podcast, go to lowerstreet.co. And now back to what you're watching. Thanks.
I would sort of say that I do like going into interviews where I feel that I can control as much as I can. And in terms of controlling as much as I can, it's the pre-call. I do slightly long form, so I have the luxury of spending 2 hours. I spoke to this woman two weeks ago, and it wasn't until 1.5 hours did we actually get to the point where I was like, yes, that's what I want to talk to you about. But I had allowed her to get all this stuff off her chest. So when we got to the actual interview itself, I know her actually quite well. And so sometimes when I am failing, or they might not be happy, I know her boundaries. I know what she doesn't want to talk about. I know what she does want to talk about. And I'll push things, a little bit more. And the flip side of what Sonari said was that I actually don't feel that I am always in control, as in I leave a lot of space to just let it flow. And I just think sometimes a lot of people, when they ask questions and they have their questions, they're not listening to the person that's talking. And I actually think listening is so critical, because if you're, oh no, what's he doing?
No. I'm just agreeing wholeheartedly. Keep going.
Okay, yeah. Because and what a lot of people do is they go in with their 10 questions, and somebody always says, oh, my 5th question is so good. It's so good. They're so excited about getting to their 5th question. And actually, if you just listen to what that person is saying, pick up what the person is saying, you probably won't really get into trouble, because you're listening and you're responding, and it's a conversation. So you will get stuck if you have 10 questions that you want to ask and it's not going well. Then you will get stuck if they don't like those questions. So definitely listen is one way.
I love that you brought that up. And I think we can't have a conversation about the art of the interview without talking about the art of listening. It's so important. Something that's really resonating for me about what all of you are saying kind of relates to my failure story, where I did like literally zero research, and that was awful. But you can also really over prepare. And it's like, as you're saying, Ena, like, I have these 10 questions, I'm going in with these 10 questions, or Sonari, a lot of what you're saying kind of makes me think of just like, having a lot of assumptions going into the interview about how it's going to go, about what they're going to say. And I think that there has to be room for spontaneity in order to get to that why, behind the sort of overarching what you think is going to happen. Yeah.
Now, what you're just saying is the perfect setup for my audio clip, which I think I would love to play, because it's not of me. It is one of the best. It was one of the best interviews that Michelle Norris. It was on All Things Considered, an NPR program. It was during the Gulf oil spill, and we did this round robin where we talked to everyone affected from the ocean to the table. Right. And this was at the end of a day. So this person we were talking to last. And what I love about it is literally you could, if you were listening in the studio, you could hear, and what she's talking to, she doesn't ask him a question. And this to me makes the interview, and it's one of the best things that Michelle has ever done, is that she was so present, and I hope you can hear it. And we would have never got this emotion if she wasn't just listening to not just the words he was saying, but how he said the words. And if you can play, I hope it'll.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's at the end of the interview, correct?
No, it's at 2:05.
2:05. Okay, cool. Just let me know when to stop. Just give me a hand signal.
Okay.
To overcome perception problems that are setting in right now as we speak.
Mr. Fahey, you sound very weary.
I'm tired. We're working twice as hard to do about 25% as much, and it grates on you after a while. And just seeing the images of that thing spewing poison into our beautiful Gulf, it just sucks it out of you. It sucks the life out of you.
Patrick Fahey runs AmeriPure Processing.
That literally is like, to me, there is that we had done all these interviews. And to me, like, I don't know if you hear it, and it was the feeling, he put the emotion on what was happening. And all she said was, "You sound weary," because she was in the moment. Literally the world was like spinning around at that time, and it was just Michelle and this guy talking about his life. And that allowed him to open up. "You sound weary" is only 3 words. She could have never written that question.
I love that. Sorry, I'm jumping in, but I just wanted to say I absolutely loved listening to that. And I absolutely loved even the moment when she said, "You sound weary." She didn't even say it as somebody who was reading off a script or a question. You could hear the empathy. And I think that is so important. And with that empathy, and it was sort of one of my tips, is that a lot of the time people have questions, but when you're listening, also look at that person if you can, and you can hear how they sound, you can see how they feel. And if you can pick that up, then that can just be worth so much.
The best questions are usually less than 4 words.
Mm-hmm.
A 1-word question is like, why? Huh?
Really?
Really? Oh, really? Really is like the best question. That you can do that. There's like 1,000. There's 1,000. Really? And it always gets the person to be like, "Yes, really." It's such a great question.
Well, it's there's 2 kinds of interviews in a way, aren't there? And you can almost just, after you've started the interview, you can just let it roll with, "Oh, why?" Or "Why?" And with just the 2 slight changes in tone, you've got curiosity and adversarial. And you can send an interview down 2 completely different paths just by asking a 1-word question in a slightly different way, which is, and people pick up on that, don't they? Like, this radio podcasting is an audio medium. And the intonation, the tone, and the voice. So, that "you sound weary," the level of empathy there was absolutely tangible, even though it was monosensory. It was only something you could hear. You couldn't see, you couldn't feel, but it was there. It was absolutely there. And that's just the power of great interviewees, isn't it? Or great interviewers, sorry.
Yeah. This is maybe a good...
Go ahead. Sorry, Erin.
No, you go ahead, sorry, and say, and then it's a nice segue into my clip, one more clip to round out our trios.
I think, though, one of the things about that is that she was prepared. So there is a thing where you're ready and you get into, like, you know who the person is, you know what's going on, and literally it's just sitting there. That's why I feel like that was good. She was prepared so that she could hear, so that she wasn't reading the next question, so she wasn't thinking about what the next question was right there. Is that you can use those as a guideline for when you're panicking or whatnot. But when you're really in the moment, then you can just listen. And
I also think as well is that a lot of people who are doing the interview, unfortunately, think it's about themselves. And sometimes the ego takes over who you're speaking to. And if you go into interviews where, I want to hear my voice a lot, or I've got this 10-minute question that might only get a 10-second answer. But it was very clear that this wasn't about her in that small clip. It was about what he was going through. And that's why it was so good.
So my clip is one that is a story of success for me, and also just had a lot of emotion in it. I'll just play it and then I'll talk about it. But this was from the first podcast project that I ever created. So this was like my DIY kind of getting into the industry sort of thing. So here it is. One painting particularly catches my eye. It's a nighttime painting in the islands from the vantage point of a boat. The moon is in the sky and is lighting everything below and reflecting on the water.
This one was out in the boat, 3 o'clock in the morning, misty, but the moon was shining. It's hard to do a night painting, but the moon was so powerful, moon and the stars, and there was a party out in the islands that I went to. I'll never forget that night.
Wow. I felt transported by Jean's paintings. Looking at that nighttime scene, I felt like I could walk into her memories in a way. So that was I realized when I went back to that piece, I was like, is there anything I can mine in here for sort of like interview successes? And it was that this was an artist, and she kept all of her paintings in the basement. And about halfway through the interview, I was like, can we go into the basement? And then this is what happened when we went into the basement. And then I realized that I've actually done this in like a bunch of other projects that I've created. I'm like, can we go into your basement? And I think that there's something there about like getting to what's underneath the thing that is on the surface, and how do you ask questions that will get there. And I think it really comes back to that why piece. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? So yeah, go into people's basements, ask to go into the basement. You never know what treasures you'll find in there.
Well, Sam, I saw a question in the chat that I just thought was interesting, which is how do you help somebody who isn't full-time interviewing, like get to that point? And I think that one of the things that we're often doing is you have to think about, you can't have when you're interviewing, you can only have one hat on, right? So you can only really put one hat on, and that's to listen to the person, right? And anything that's in the outside world, so you're not the CEO, you're not the head of the brand, you're not the this, you're not the that. Like when you're talking to someone, you have to be like in that line. And I think one of the other things is, if you're really doing a decent interview, it's not about you, and it's also not about the brand. It is about the person you're talking to. So like you have to then, figure out how to meet this thing with what's going on. But you shouldn't, it's going to be a dull interview, no matter who you're talking to, where it is. If you're like sitting in, looking at the employee, or, I did a Bring Back Bronco, and I don't remember. I see Jeff, the producer of that show, is on. But I don't the executives weren't sitting in looking over our shoulder, so that it made, so you have to think about what you're doing. You can sort of figure out the implications after that. But when you're interviewing, you have to be the interviewer, not the CEO of the company or whatever person. But I wanted to answer that one specifically.
I completely agree. And actually, it's a really good point for brands in podcasting, actually, because, you've got an aim for the podcast as a series, and that is usually thought leadership, being front of mind for buying decisions or whatever that might be. But you're completely right, Sonari. In the interview, when you're in that interview, you are the interviewer. You have to be paying attention. You have to be in that room. You just have to be there, enjoying the moment, listening, asking why when it matters, being human, not being necessarily the CEO of a company, just being someone talking to someone. Everything else can be added later. It doesn't need to be now. Whilst you're interviewing, you're just there. And, if you want to get to that stage where you're a confident interviewer, it's a conversation. Just think of it as a conversation and try not, this is really easy to say and hard to do, try not to worry. Nothing is make or break. Good.
I disagree with you there, because I think sometimes the word confident is such a word that everyone's like, where do I get my confidence from? How do I become confident? And I think the confidence comes in the prep. It comes in the pre-chat. But I'm not at home at the moment. I'm doing a series and talking about pornography at the moment with really vulnerable people. And I have been so stressed about it, the anxiety, I didn't sleep well. And it's because I'm always doubting myself. Is it a good story? Have I got enough questions? Am I answering the brief? And what's really weird is it always comes together. And when you're there and you're talking to them and you're having a rapport and they're saying amazing things, and afterwards you're like, I hope I remember this and I'm confident for the next interview, but I know I'll be exactly the same. I'll be doubting myself, but doubt is good. At journalism school, someone said to us, if you ever get to the point where you walk in and you're like, oh, I'm so good at this, then that's when you should be questioning yourself, because that's when you start making mistakes.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in, everyone, and thank you all for this fascinating conversation. I am not the only one. The chat has been on fire. A lot of compliments about this conversation. So thank you so much. It was very, very informative. I also have tons of questions that I'm afraid we won't be able to answer them all. We've got about 9 minutes to do a very short Q&A. So I'm going to start right in. There's been a lot of questions about interview prep. And so everyone is wondering, what's a good way to prepare an interviewee? Should you... to what length should you go? Should you send them an agenda, all of the questions ahead? Do you want something that's extremely well prepared? Someone was actually sharing an experience where they interviewed a Silicon Valley CEO, and so well that actually it came off as very dry the day of the recording. What's your recommendation there?
Very quickly, I would say preparing is, Quincy Jones said, when, you're recording Aretha Franklin, you put 2 microphones, you rehearse the band for 2 hours, and then you leave some room for God to come in, right? So meaning you want to have done, and I'm finding, by the way, now that this is a good use of AI. It's where you're helping with research. You want to read the main articles. You don't want to be not into the place. I use the example of the most popular podcast ever, apparently, which is Shannon Sharp and Cat Williams, right? He had an arc of the interview. He had all the questions, and it got 50 million downloads. He's very prepared. He has a stack of questions. You look at that, right? So I think it's no one can tell you how much to prepare, but those basic things, the Wikipedia entry, reading the big articles, reading what the person has said, and then the other part is, I try to tell the same thing to everyone, not to give them the questions because that is boring, is to give them the understanding. And then I often say when it's people and if a UFO falls, comes to Earth at the moment of the interview, I'll ask you about that, right? So I'll leave it up to the Ena and Erin. How do you prep people when you call them up, Erin?
Well, I'll say that I feel strongly about the sending people questions beforehand or not, but it's kind of a gray area answer. So in general, when people ask me for the questions, my answer is no. because I don't want them to over-prepare. And I'm sure that we've all had this experience before where you've sent someone a list of questions and they have literally, even if you told them specifically not to, they literally wrote out their answers, which then also they're reading off of a page. So they're like reading and it sounds awful. There's no spontaneity. It's terrible. But I throw that out the window when I'm interviewing someone who is in an extremely vulnerable position. It sounds like, Ena, you're working on some projects right now that are very much in this vein, because there is an understandable fear with those people of you embarrassing them or you turning their story into grief porn or just not handling it with respect. So in those cases, I send them the questions. I'll tell them, don't prepare. Please, we're going to have a conversation, but I'm not, but it's part of the building trust with them, sending the questions beforehand. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that. And what's your approach?
Obviously, pre-preparing for me comes with having a conversation with them when they've agreed to chat with me. I'm always quite clear that it's what we talk about is off the record, so they feel that they can then just talk. But a pre-interview, I never send them the questions. They'll ask, I never send them the questions. But what I sort of remind, the pre-interview is for them to get to know me, for them to ask any questions that they feel that they've got to understand where they sit in the story. They've got to understand where I feel that their story archive will go. I'll explain to them the equipment I'm bringing. I'll send them links of what I've done before. So the pre-interview isn't really just even about them. It's to give them the opportunity to ask me anything that they want and anything that they're worried about. And we'll go off and talk about whatever they're worried about. So that's why the pre-interview is also to see if they can string words together. So that's the pre-interview for me. It's very much for them to get to know me, for them to get to trust me, for them to understand that I get their story. And also when it comes to the research, I definitely over-prepare. My head is full of everything. But the pre-interview on a story, I wouldn't have just read. I would have called experts. I would have spoken to friends. I've chatted to my friend about, what do you think about pornography? How does that fit in your life? And I'm just getting those anecdotes, because then when I go and speak to people, I can say, well, my friend said this. Do you think this? And I can bring human aspects into it. So pre-interviews are a bigger thing, it's getting to know each other.
And sometimes it takes a very long time to get that to happen. I just did a podcast called Shattering the System, and it was about people using drugs and things like that. And some of the pre-interviews, it was weeks, months, and those times. It's really breaking down who you are and letting people know what you're about and what role they play, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing a story about this. This is the area, as someone said in the chat, that we're going to go.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was very insightful again. Very quickly, we've got a question from Anne-Marie, and I think this is a very relevant question for some brands out there. Anne-Marie is asking, how do you take a very dry or highly technical topic and make the person entertaining?
I would love to take this one on. Oh, sorry, go.
Oh, no, Sam. No, you go, Sam.
So my background is actually more in educational content. I've done a lot of educational content over the years and interviewed a lot of scientists. The thing is, but under the story, under the headline of whatever it is that they're a specialist in, and it could genuinely be paint drying. There are people whose job in the world is to watch paint dry. There is a story that got them to that place. And there is a reason they get up and watch paint dry every single day. And I did a podcast series called Pint of Science, where we took leading researchers in incredibly dry sounding fields, and we took them to the pub. And if they were drinkers, we got them a little bit tipsy. If they weren't, we just took them to a comfortable place where we were equals and we'd sit around a table. And I just got them to tell the story of their research. And it was a long interview because sometimes it takes time to break down those barriers and get to the human underneath the facts. But one of the most interesting interviews I've ever done was about Himalayan sea salt. And it was a guy, a geologist, who is the world's leading expert on Himalayan sea salt. Turns out it's actually really interesting if you just take the time to listen to people. But you've got to ask the right questions. You've got to ask that why. And if they start to give dry answers, you can't let them lead that conversation. You've got to ask, why is this interesting? Really? And how did that happen?
I once had to do an interview in Margaret Thatcher's house, and I was in Margaret Thatcher's bathroom, and it was just going around audio, look at her wallpaper. And we ended up, my last question to him was, you're going to be living in this house. You will be sharing the same bidet as Margaret Thatcher shared. You'll be washing your bum in the same thing that she washed her bum in. And it just created some laughter. He was like, I can't believe you've even asked that. And you can just have fun. I just think, just relax sometimes, just relax.
And sometimes if you're playing a character, like that's also a thing, is that you're playing a character, you're reflecting a thing, right? So probably my biggest story is about a tariff, the chicken tax, right? It's so incredibly boring, but you are the mirror. So that's where earlier in the conversation where we said things like, really? Well, why is that important? Like your response is now, if you spent your life covering Himalayan sea salt, you're going to be like, it's important because of this, and this. Remember that you are a character, and it doesn't matter as much how people perceive you as are they getting the information. So sometimes you might have to be a jerk so that the person that you're interviewing is able to shine.
I'd just add one point really quickly at the end, which is particular to podcasting, I think, is that people have agreed to talk to you. They wouldn't have agreed to talk to you if they weren't interested in the subject. So you've just got to find that. You've got to find that. You've got to get down into it. They're here because they're interested and passionate and they want to talk. Your job as the interviewer is to bring that out.
Well put. Everyone, that was so enjoyable. As a podcast nerd, and I would hope that we're surrounded by many podcast nerds in this audience today, that was a deeply enjoyable conversation, and one that I would like to continue. In fact, there were so many questions that we couldn't get to, so we might see if we can answer those offline in some way and help folks with those things. But Sonari, Ena, Sam, Erin, thank you so much. A reminder again to everybody, recordings of these sessions are available online, so you can get them later. But this was really wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks
for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Don't forget, if you need help with your brand's podcast, we'd love to have a chat. You can find us at lowerstreet.co. If you'd like more content like this, or to find out information on podcasting events we have coming up in the near future, head to brandpodcastsummit.com.